Hi, thank you so much for watching this short video outlining my dissertation proposal. I'd like to dedicate this video to present and former students like Alejandro, Austin, Sean, Sal, Carl, Gerardo, Juan Carlos, Juan, Oscar. Your lives are not lost, but found in our work. You built this proposal with me as co-authors in the truest sense, and I will hold you with me on my academic journey, which starts with this research proposal. The research that I propose addresses the problem and opportunity found in the note with which I begin my proposal. In this note, we do see the multiple problems like gang activity, note the N signaling Norteño gang affiliation, but we also see opportunity, perfect punctuation, an esprit de corps, so to speak. So I can articulate a problem of practice, specifically the dimension of this problem that I address with my research is that carceral teachers seldom receive the specialized training they need to function effectively in the unique carceral environment. Indeed, there is exactly zero research exploring carceral high school teaching of the important gateway skills of mathematics. My research is poised to change this reality and open up an opportunity for reform. This opportunity, math teachers in carceral high schools have a transformative opportunity for reform by coming together to explore opening their classrooms to student strengths derived from home and social worlds. This is an especially urgent opportunity, considering the students who are getting sealed into the school to prison pipeline. Our students are disproportionately youth of color. And crucially, while juvenile populations are going down, the disparity is increasing, some states by 100%. And how else are these classrooms unique? They are in need of specialized support. Over half of our students have academic skills below grade level. Our population qualifies for special education at rates 3 to 5 times higher than in the general population. And finally, over 70% say they've experienced trauma in their childhood. Not only that, the literature confirms my practitioner experience that students in these classrooms are highly transient as they are being run through the gauntlet of the criminal justice system. This all adds up to teachers needing to differentiate and scaffold over a wide range of levels, despite the clear need for evidence-based guidance concerning this complex environment. Our practice is understudied, especially when it comes to the asset-based approaches, specifically the funds of knowledge approach, despite 30 years of being applied from New Zealand to China, has never been studied in the carceral context. Therefore, I have created 3 research questions to focus my research. Number 1, how do carceral mathematics teachers perceive learners' funds of knowledge and their relevance to math instruction? Number 2, what range of pedagogical principles and practices, including the way they structure talk and math classes, do carceral mathematics teachers report using to tap into their learners' funds of knowledge? And 3, how do carceral mathematics teachers' views and expectations on the incorporation of learners' funds of knowledge reflect their teaching background and context? This research is practitioner inquiry. Thus, the first aim of this research is to improve my own practice and thus the learning experience of my students. Of course, a second aim of this dissertation research that I will publish is to contribute data, analysis, and findings that can help bring this time-tested best practice to a specialized setting bereft of personalized training. Before I lay out the details of my methodology, I'd like to share some of the evidence that has informed this design. In the proposal, I first establish as a practitioner, unlike the typical researcher, I am pulling from the experience I have at work every day. I won't lay out the whole grams and ounces conversation. Suffice to say, I learned, thanks to Zach, that my students know how to do sophisticated equivalent fractions and unit conversion problems, but only when they're presented in limited context with very specific language that presents some challenges to including in the classroom. Of course, outside of practitioner experience, substantial literature informed my design. First, I'll discuss my theoretical framework. Remember this? Funds of knowledge. While I focus on the first article that brought this concept to the education field, it is important to note that the Funds of Knowledge Foundation was laid by a number of collaborations between the group referred to as the Tucson academics, anthropologists, education academics, doctoral students, and teachers, focused on demonstrating that educators were getting positive outcomes using these and subsequent trainings. However, Mall et al. 92 used their article to focus on laying out the fundamental principles of funds of knowledge, specifying twin goals for funds of knowledge research to show that this approach is both feasible and useful. My research is designed to be sensitive enough, so to speak, to pick up both frequencies. In the nearly 30 decades since the first Funds of Knowledge article, the community geographics have expanded and the unit of analysis has changed from the household to a variety of other social units that students are a part of. This has informed a focus in my research on which aspects of outside life worlds teachers feel can or should be connected to classroom learning objectives. Although Funds of Knowledge was originally intended to connect strengths from home and family life to the classroom, the original researchers have welcomed expansion to include many complex life worlds that also mediate how they participate in their school world. Zippin, 2009, developed these terms, school world and life worlds, to contrast the learning happening at school with the multiple outside situated learning spaces of students in a fluid, multicultural, and trauma-impacted community in Australia. Zippin observed teachers in the study group reporting that when they gave the students the floor to talk about how they navigated the world outside school, inevitably students introduced what Zippin called dark elements of experience, like knowing to leave the skate park early before the drug dealers come out. Zippin noted that most teachers were policing this boundary due to perceived emotional and legal institutional risk, despite the potential of including the more confounding funds. Following Zippin's expansion of this framework, Huerta and Rios Aguilar extend these ideas when they argue that some of what they term gang funds of knowledge gained by the students to survive the streets must be welcome in the classroom to transform students' experiences with teaching and learning in academic spaces. This has important implications for students in carceral settings who often have spent years getting pushed out of school and into dark conditions such as the world of drug and sex trafficking. It probably strikes many that a deficit perspective would lead to a teacher labeling a student's relevant life world as, for example, a gang, drug dealing, etc. We may interpret this reaction as an admirable instinct to protect the student from the projection of negative stereotypes, just as the Tucson academics wanted to do when Mall et al. 92 specifically positioned funds of knowledge as a reaction to the communities they studied having been largely defined by these negative elements. But Geraldo et al. 2017 argue for the importance of recognizing the unique situated learning that exists among gangs and in prison. There we go. because indeed a refusal to incorporate these funds could demonstrate a deficit positioning of gangs in prison as unstructured, barren, non-stop nonsense with no sophisticated learning that could be transferred to other realms. Gerardo et al. Argue this is not the case, with evidence of students navigating community college through use of transferable funds of knowledge from gangs in prison. I interpret this literature to mean that pushed out students in carceral settings should use math, funds of knowledge they learn in the spaces they got pushed out to as a tool to succeed in the area of mathematics, a gatekeeper subject. Moving to the specific area of mathematics, it must be noted that in their comprehensive review of carceral teacher professional development, Gagnon et al. 2014 found themselves needing to borrow from educational research in special education, as there was no information on carceral mathematics instruction. In the same way, I reach out to funds of knowledge research on mathematics. The Bridge Project was created and written about at the turn of the century to adapt the original funds of knowledge methodology to the math content area. And participants found themselves struggling to connect classroom math to everyday home math, in this case, the math of sewing. On the one side, the underlying mathematical principles of the everyday were not always evident to household members, while on the one side, the formerly trained mathematicians without manual work experience found it hard to understand the everyday labor practice well enough to connect it to math learning objectives. It was the teacher study group, right, Gonzalez et al., 2001, that allowed space to connect the two. To conclude this quick tour of my literature review, I'd like to highlight literature regarding key dimensions of the terms culture and discourse that I have concluded must be foregrounded in efforts to apply funds of knowledge to the complex carceral environment. Tate, 1995, and many others have shown that teachers tend to see school mathematics as a subject that is free of what are often termed culture issues. However, Nasir et al. 2008 say it is essential to be intentional about the cultural dimension of teaching mathematics. And they define cultural knowledge, instead of bringing in racial and socioeconomic descriptors, as knowledge derived from settings outside of school. They contrast this knowledge with domain knowledge, knowledge valued in the practitioners in the practices prescribed by mathematicians and math educators. Razfar 2012 illustrate this and its connection to language when describing a mathematics activity for teachers in training that was rooted in baseball statistics. They found that teachers who had not spent time in baseball spaces struggled to apply math they usually knew when it was related to baseball statistic, unlike their colleagues who were well versed in baseball. Through working on this activity together, it was reported that the group developed a more situated and social view of mathematical discourse and its relationship to student learning. So while literature like Nasir et al. 2008 laments the lack of in-depth attention to language in the majority of mathematics teaching courses, we see opportunities to challenge this. Among them, a growing opportunity of researchers such as Brown 2019 and Emden 2016. They make the case that specifically science and mathematics teachers must be thoughtful and intentional in how they connect the non-vernacular classroom discourse with the students' primary discourse. While Emden 2020 refers to this intentional connection as rachidemic, and Brown 2019 uses Babha's term third space, my analysis is that they're talking about the same thing, using discourse to create a space where unequal and uneven forces of cultural representation merge in a place that exists outside of the dynamics of oppression, if only briefly. These studies reveal that barriers come down when math and science are related to a context with which the learner identifies and in which they spend time. Gay, Ladson Billings, Paris, and many others have shown conclusively that where students' authentic life worlds knowledge come together with the content of the curriculum, students learn better. Now, pivoting to the specifics of my research design. Despite the 30 years that funds of knowledge has been explored and studied around the world, no research gives us data about how this approach might improve the practice of our carceral teachers. To change this reality, I will plan and conduct a practitioner inquiry using a community of practice made up of carceral mathematics teachers. Additionally, I will conduct Seidman's series of 3 interviews with 3 teachers who are participating in the group. And this data will go through 2 cycles of coding to help me identify themes and relationships between these themes. Finally, the presentation of my findings will point us towards asset-based transformation within carceral learning communities. The monthly virtual community of practice meetings will effectively be the setting of the data collection. Teacher-learner communities of practice are a common as well proven best practice for professional development in business and education, Wenger, 1998, etc. A community of practice always has a domain, a practice, and participants. In this case, the domain is carceral mathematics. The practice is the use of funds of knowledge pedagogy in reaching mathematics learning objectives, and the participants recruited are carceral teachers, including myself. My intended sample consists of at least 15 teachers who are responsible for helping carceral students meet secondary mathematics at facilities throughout the United States. I have chosen broad parameters for many reasons. Putting restrictions like grade level, facility type, or credential would not be helpful in this context. Also, as Friedrich and McKinney 2010 and others have written, there are hidden assumptions and theories of action that can get in the way of change. The diversity of perspective will allow the participants of the community of practice to challenge assumptions that have gone unquestioned in certain jurisdictions. For data collection, I will specifically utilize participant observation, ethnography, and Seidman's 3 interview series to collect data about carceral teacher perceptions and applications of funds of knowledge. Data memos, teacher lesson plans, and jottings will complement the transcript data of the community of practice and interviews. Finally, for analysis, I will do a first cycle of coding using dramaturgical, in vivo, and versus coding to capture the tensions between life worlds, school worlds, and third space. In fact, Saldana 2014 writes that versus coding is a common tool to use with discourse analysis. And although I am at the nascent stage of understanding formal critical discourse analysis, at this state, I'm already finding app tools like the Why This Way and Not That Way tool, G 2014. I will use Quirkos qualitative analysis data software that allows me to visualize data in a landscape of code bubbles that can be clustered and collapsed into each other. In this second cycle, my initial codes will be grouped through pattern coding. During this stage, I will also be writing data memos on emerging themes, analytic insights, and subjective experiences. Finally, my preliminary findings and interpretations will go through a critical friends process. System-impacted members of the community will act as crucial critical friends to work through my findings about the world that has affected them so profoundly. Indeed, this study is constrained by not including student voices, but it will be used as a stepping stone to more robust research and working with system-impacted individuals to help shape my findings, signals, and enacts, the first step towards this aspiration. This study has many implications that could impact carceral secondary education. By the end, a group of carceral practitioners will have practiced thinking about teaching in a way that's sensitive to students' life worlds and primary discourses, as well as the life world discourse that governs the carceral world. My research further through publication, my research has the opportunity to impact a wider community of practitioners in carceral education and law enforcement managing carceral facilities in which there are classrooms. Both the process and the product of this endeavor will support the transformation of carceral teacher practice, thus transforming the students' time in carceral classrooms. I'd like to thank you for listening and thank my students and the community members at whose feet I have been a learner for so many years. Students like Alejandro, Austin, Sean, Sal, Carl, Gerardo, Juan Carlos, Juan, Oscar, to say just the names of a few. You live on in my work. I hold this space for you, and I hope my research makes you proud.